All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Screen Review. My name is Megan.
And I'm Dina, and make sure to follow us at Boca Tribune on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Today, we're going to be reviewing the 2007 movie called Zodiac. It's about 2 hours and 42 minutes, and it's rated R. So, first, as always, we're going to give just our kind of general thoughts of the movie, and then we're going to go into the more detailed breakdown. So, Dina, what did you think about the movie?
Overall, I thought the case was very interesting itself. I thought the cast of this movie was incredible, all very good actors.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I think Megan and I can agree the movie itself was kind of just like a movie. It didn't really do anything kind of special. But again, the case itself and the acting was really good. It's just that this movie didn't really stand out to me, I would say. How about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think the fact that it's almost 3 hours long also was a little unnecessary. It definitely could have cut it back down to like 2 hours, an hour and a half, even, I would say. It was good. I mean, Dean and I were talking earlier. We both enjoy like true crime kind of entertainment, I suppose. And this obviously was, not true crime, like a documentary in a sense. It was definitely, there were actors, it was a movie, but still it was interesting to think about. And I think for me, I've heard about the Zodiac killer before and all that. And I've always found it kind of interesting. So it was nice to watch a movie dedicated to it. And although they took kind of a different approach to it, it was fine. It was a movie. It was good. I enjoyed it in a sense.
Yeah, I would agree. But
Mm-hmm.
I was entertained. I would say I wasn't like
Yeah.
falling asleep. But again,
Mm-hmm.
the case itself is really what kept me
Yes.
onto it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. The case, and then like you were saying, the actors, because I mean, they definitely had a star-studded cast. I mean, they
Hmm.
really went a little bit
Hmm.
far with all just name brand actors, household
Yeah.
names, I
Hmm.
would say. Hmm.
For sure.
So yeah, I guess I mean that'd be it. I would say like a little kind of warning in a sense. Like this movie was a little violent. I mean, they show the killings that the Zodiac did in a sense. So if you're kind of wary of that, I would steer clear of this movie because they do show it. It's not overly graphic or anything, but I mean they show it. So just to kind
Yeah.
of be aware, I guess. And so now I think that's it. I guess we'll kind of go into the breakdown of the movie. And for this one, we're not really going to follow exactly chronologically what happens in the movie because the movie kind of just follows chronologically what happens with the case and what the Zodiac killer does or doesn't do or supposedly does. They skip around a lot in time in this movie. So I think
Mhm.
we're just going to kind of go from, I guess, the beginning. So Dina, I guess take us kind of the breakdown of who the Zodiac killer is, or I mean, not that we know, but what he did, things like that.
So the Zodiac killer, again, not that we know, the case technically is still open, even though it's
Mm-hmm.
been like what, over 40 years? Oh,
Yeah.
even more, like 60
Yeah,
years, I would
it's
say.
okay. I think it's 2000 all the time as well. Whenever I think of
Yeah,
like
me too.
1950, 1970, I'm like, oh, 40, 30 years ago, sure.
Yeah, I always think that.
Mhm.
But yeah, like 60 years, oh my God. So obviously, like the case is technically closed, but they did say that like it's still opened, like because they never
Mhm.
really had like an end. They never truly found out who the Zodiac killer is. And basically this killer kind of was in, I believe, north all of California, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, yeah,
There
it's California, specifically northern, but I mean, he kind of jumped all over the place.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was like a point where he was like in Los Angeles and like Riverside and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it was kind of he was like all over California, really, all these killings. We think that they were all the Zodiac. Megan and I were talking earlier about how I thought that, and she agrees that it could have just been multiple different people. Either they were connected, maybe they weren't connected. And basically, this whole movie kind of starts the whole case in which this San Francisco Chronicle gets this letter from, at this point, he wasn't calling himself Zodiac, I don't think, but they just get
Mm.
this letter from a man saying like he confesses to this killing and he has like a cipher in his letters, right?
Yeah.
And it was like just basically this code that says like this very long, like basically he says like if someone cracks it, I believe like these two history teachers in California, and it basically says something like I am a killer, like I love killing. Very very, he doesn't really sound like a smart man in his codes, but the fact that he coded it in the first place
Yeah.
kind of makes him sound smart. So it's like,
Yeah, and it was interesting to think that, like, I mean, the police didn't crack it. You know, the
Mhm.
newspaper organization, the publication, didn't crack it. It was just these two, like, this couple, like, they were both, you know, kind of history puzzle buffs, and they were just like, yeah, I'm gonna get this, and then,
Yeah.
you know, they were able to solve it. So I think
Mhm.
that's definitely interesting. And I mean, it's definitely scary. So I guess I would say that, you know, kind of the scariest part of the San Francisco Chronicle, which is where our story essentially takes place. We follow pretty much everyone in the San Francisco Chronicle and then these cops that are working on the Zodiac case. I mean, the Zodiac essentially lays out saying, oh, if you don't publish this cipher, like this letter on the front page of your newspaper tomorrow, like I'm going to just go on a killing rampage. So post it or don't, you know, publish it or don't. And so, I mean, that's definitely scary to think about because, I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know, it's scary. It's like quite a choice to make. You know, do I play into what the killer wants or do I make another decision and potentially have all this blood on my hands, you know? So
Right.
it's interesting to think about. But I will say that, you know, confirmed the Zodiac killer, you know, he's killed 5, injured 2, but he claims to have killed 37. So it's
Right.
interesting to kind of make that claim with no concrete proof, which is another one of the reasons why this case is so interesting and kind of convoluted because there's so many claims being made, there's so many letters, so many things, but it's like there's no evidence really pointing to any of it. You know,
Mhm.
they had was circumstantial evidence because I guess you want to explain the characters in the movie and then we'll get into it. I feel like I'm kind of on a
Right. Yeah.
tangent.
The characters themselves, our main character is Robert Graysmith, I believe, who is
Yes.
his cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, where our whole kind of story, I guess, takes place or at least starts. And he's a cartoonist who basically he like kind of understands the ciphers because he goes to the library. He says, not he actually does go to the library.
Love the library.
Yeah, he loves the library, and so he knows all these ciphers or whatever, and so he's able to decode it, and he kind of gets really interested in it. So then he starts to help this homicide reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle with the case. Not necessarily help, but the homicide reporter kind of goes to him as kind of, I guess they just become these friends in a sense. So they kind of work on it together a little bit, but you know, it's very interesting. And then kind of on the side, we also see these 2 detectives who are also somewhere in San Francisco. I don't really know the
I think they were,
geography of San Francisco, but something like that. And so we're also following them like on the case itself because, you know, they're actively detectives. And so you kind of see both sides, I guess, to the whole case where you kind of see the reporting side and the detective side, but they're both kind of investigating. So I thought that was kind of interesting, especially considering it's real. And Robert Graysmith, our main character, he kind of gets really interested into the Zodiac case itself, which is very interesting because he was a cartoonist and he wasn't really high up in the ranks. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely is interesting that this, I mean, it also overtook his life. I mean, you watch this character, you know, you kind of follow him. You know that he's divorced originally at the beginning of the movie and he has a child and a son with his previous wife. And then you watch him, you know, kind of get married and have more kids with this other woman. And then you watch him totally kind of just dive into the Zodiac case and just become so obsessed with it, obsessed with figuring it out because the detectives gave up and, you know, Paul Avery, the other journalist that he was working with, you know, gave up and he quit the job and went somewhere else. So he kind of took it as his responsibility to solve this case because no one else would. You know, he said that it was his mission to like look the killer in the eye and know it's him. Like he had to figure it out. And so, I mean, this led to the dissolution of his marriage and a strenuous relationship with his children. Like this kind of became the only important thing to him, which is really interesting to think about, you know, because it wasn't even his job, like you were saying.
Yeah, and he did lose his job as a cartoonist, and again, all these characters that we're mentioning are real characters. So the thing is that Robert Graysmith becomes so kind of involved in this case that he kind of goes out and he's like, you know what, I'm going to write a book about it because he becomes so involved in this case. And again, it takes over his life. He ends up losing his job. And like this book kind of like figuring out the clues, the loose ends that detectives never really got to of the case kind of became his whole life. And this book did come out. It is a real book called The Zodiac or just Zodiac. And so again, this whole case kind of took over his whole life. Keep in mind, this movie a reason why it's so long and lengthy is because I think it goes over the span of nearly 30 years, right? So that starts in like the mid 60s, I would say.
I think it was, like 1968, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's July 4th, 1968.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it ends in like 1991. So it's a really long movie, and this book takes Robert Graysmith, I guess, many years to solve. And again, another thing, the Zodiac case itself isn't solved technically. They still don't really know who the Zodiac killer or killers were. But yeah, so Robert Graysmith, basically his whole life was taken over by this book. And I think his reasoning for starting this book is because there's this one scene in the movie where years after the Zodiac case kind of like started and like everyone gave up on it, there was a movie showing, like a movie premiere about the Zodiac case itself. And everyone who was kind of involved in it went to this premiere. So Robert Graysmith meets up with one of the main detectives that was on the case. His name, Toschi, right? Dave Toschi.
Yeah, they pronounced it Toschi in the movie, I'm pretty sure. But it's wrong. I'm sorry.
And they kind of meet up with each other, and Robert Graysmith is kind of like, oh, like, you should keep going on the Zodiac case. Like, I believe in you. And Dave Toschi, the detective, was like, they're already making movies about it. Like, there's no more case to go into. And so from that, he wanted to, he was like, oh, well, no one cares about this case anymore. So many people died. Like, now it's my turn. And he wanted to write a book.
Yeah. So. And I will mention that it's interesting that this movie that they showed is actually a movie. It's called Dirty Harry. And apparently the main cop in the movie was based off of Dave Toschi, like the real life person.
Okay.
Yeah. And the killer, like the bad guy in this movie, was based off the Zodiac. So essentially this movie was about Dave Toschi. And that's why I guess it was so particularly upsetting to him, because I was reading up on, the accuracy of the movie before this, as were you. And it said that Toschi was actually quite, not famous necessarily, but he was well known in the area for kind of, not being aggressive, but he definitely had a reputation about him, I would say. And so he was an inspiration for another character in another movie around that time. So it's definitely interesting to think that, sure, yes, it was the inspiration for Robert Graysmith's writing of the book, but it's also like, I don't know, imagine going to the theater, like he got time off work because he was so upset about the case not working out for him not being able to figure it out. So he went to the theater with his wife just to kind of have, a relaxing night, whatever. And he watched this movie, and it's about how mean you are and how bad of a job you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, well, I wanted a nice night off.
You can kind of see everyone's spirits kind of like go down from this case, other than Robert Graysmith, which is why I guess, the case, I guess he was kind of, you could say, like the string holding the whole case together, because he kept going at it. And his main thing became very big. Well, there were so many suspects for this case, so many suspects. They couldn't decipher who. There were fingerprints that couldn't be matched. There were handwriting samples because, the Zodiac wrote letters to newspapers that couldn't be matched. There were just such random, like non-specific, no motive killings, no motive, like necessarily killings, most of them. And it was just so sporadic and so crazy, and so many false allegations. Like, I think like you mentioned, Megan, earlier, that someone thought their dad was the Zodiac killer. Like,
there's a whole book about that one. Yeah.
Right. So it's like ridiculous. Like, they could never really, there were so many suspects on the case, and there were few that stood out. And so there's this one scene where Robert Graysmith is like interviewing this guy who worked with this other guy who claims to have recordings of all of the Zodiac killer cases. And so he came to question him. And there was a point where, Robert Graysmith is showing this guy like a poster that he's asking him about poster. And he's like, oh, look at this poster he made. Like, it's the closest to the handwriting of the Zodiac. And the guy he's interviewing is like, that's my handwriting. I made that. And immediately the whole scene shifts, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, like, is this the end of the movie? Like, is he about to kill Robert Graysmith, this guy? Because he's like, come to my basement. I'm going to go check some files. And he follows him to the basement. Like an idiot. Who would do that? Every horror movie ever is telling you not to do that.
To his credit, it was like, what, the 1960s, 1970s? I
There
guess
were no horror movies.
I'm sure there horror movies. I actually don't know. Probably.
Maybe just not like today, not the
Yeah.
same tropes as
Definitely
today.
not.
Yeah. But it was a very scary scene, and so that was like one of his suspects. And then another really big one that Dave Toschi, the big detective on the Zodiac killer case, also was like his number one suspect, was Arthur Lee Miller, correct? Arthur
Lee
Lee
Allen.
Allen. Sorry,
There
I
you
was
go.
thinking of the
No, you're
author,
fine.
Arthur Miller. Sorry, Arthur Lee Allen. And so that was like one of our big suspects. Earlier in the movie, we kind of see Toschi interview him with his like fellow colleagues. And I can say, I think you can agree, he seemed pretty guilty. He seemed
Yeah,
like,
the way he was acting was very strange, very odd. I mean, he clearly wasn't in I guess the best state of mind, and he very suspiciously acting, I would say.
yeah, he was like, there was one point they were questioning him, and he was like, "Oh, but don't worry about the two knives with blood on them in my trunk. I used them to kill a chicken for dinner." I was like, and he mentioned it out of nowhere. No one was asking him about the two bloody knives in his trunk. No one knew there were two bloody knives in his trunk, and he was like, "Oh, because I told the cops about it earlier." So he was kind of on the cops' radar for a while, but with the handwriting samples and the fingerprint samples, none of them necessarily matched to Arthur Lee Allen. Yes. And so none of them matched, so they couldn't really blame him for anything. Although he was a suspect, they couldn't arrest him, they couldn't get away with it. There was a scene where they were talking to his sister-in-law and the detectives, and she was like, I asked his psychiatrist, like, do you think this man is capable of murdering someone? And the psychiatrist said yes. So kind of all signs were kind of pointing to this guy. But then we skip 5 years later in the movie, and there's still no person. And so later in the movie, Robert Graysmith, I forget how this guy gets on his radar again. Do you remember something with a birthday?
Oh, yes. I do remember the thing with the birthday. So the thing about the Zodiac is, not in addition to these letters and everything, the Zodiac would also call people. He specifically was calling this one guy. I think his last name was like Melai or something like that was his last name. And so he would call this guy. Yeah, it started with, I think it was Melai. Regardless, that's his last name. So he would call this guy at his house, but the guy was gone for Christmas vacation, so his housekeeper answered the phone, and it was the Zodiac speaking, and he spoke to the housekeeper and said, like, "Oh, is Melai there?" And she's like, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, he's on Christmas vacation right now. But, like, do you want to take a message?" And he said essentially, "Oh, today's my birthday. I'm going to kill because it's my birthday." Essentially, that's what he said. And so Robert Graysmith was able to take this one kind of line and ask the housekeeper, "Oh, do you remember, like, I know this is many years ago, but do you remember when Melai took the vacation?" And she narrowed it down to like the week of Christmas, but he was back Christmas Day. And there were certain things adding up. Essentially, he came to the conclusion it was either December 18th or 19th, I believe. Like the 18th or the 20th, I think was his window. 20th. Yeah, that was his window. And I think his wife, right. His wife came in one day when he was kind of going crazy about the case, essentially to be like, "Oh, the kids miss you, but like, I don't want them to see you like this. Like, get well. I hope it all works out for you." She dropped off like a copy of Arthur Lee Allen's license that she got somehow. And that showed that his birthday was December 18th, which matched what Robert Graysmith was thinking, and that the Zodiac killer had that birthday window because he said, today's my birthday. And that's what matched the housekeeping call.
Yeah.
I will also say the watches was another part in why people thought that Arthur Lee Allen was potentially the Zodiac, because they essentially kind of deduced, I guess you could say, that this term, the Zodiac, whatever, is in addition to his symbol, which was like a circle with like a line going through it or something that he would sign every letter with, and he called himself, "Oh, this is the Zodiac speaking," would pretty much be how he started every letter or so. And so they found the only time Zodiac and that symbol had been used in combination was a certain line of watches called like Zodiac watches, and they had a little symbol on the face of the watch. And so when the police, Toschi and his other, fellow officers were interviewing Arthur Lee Allen, they noticed he had on a Zodiac watch. And Arthur Lee Allen was like, "Oh, it was a gift from my mother." Like, such a nice watch, right? And so it was just interesting. That was another piece of evidence that definitely implicated him in a sense. I guess maybe these were rare watches or something. I'm not quite sure. I'm not a huge watch person, but seems specific.
Yeah, and so essentially after he found that out, that it was, or necessarily found it out, he kind of visited Lee. They called him Lee in the movie. That was his middle name. They called him Lee. He goes to Lee's kind of place of work and kind of literally just stares at him for a really long time. A very awkwardly long scene of him just like staring at him. It's very strange. And then in the next scene, which is essentially, I think it's like the last scene of the movie, this guy, one of the first cases from the Zodiac we were introduced to, this guy who survived a Zodiac killing, kind of points out, is being questioned, and he points to a face of Lee, Arthur Lee Allen, and he's like, this is the guy who shot me and my friend or whatever so many years ago. And then from there, they kind of have like every, true crime movie ever, they have like those black screens with the writing on it explaining what happens after the movie ends. And that's when you find out that apparently, very, very coincidental, Arthur Lee Allen had a heart attack like 2 weeks before he was supposed to have like questioning with lawyers. So I thought that was very coincidental. Obviously, it was a heart attack. They figured that out, so there's not really much around that. But there are many theories for the Zodiac killing, who it was, who did it.
Yes, I will be perusing the Zodiac subreddit after this, because now I'm interested.
Sure. And I want to know other people's theories. I have a theory that it wasn't connected at all, because at one point in the movie they say that the letters, like, kind of, I guess, what's the word? Not convincing. Saying that he did the killing. Only came out, only kind of were sent after the report of the killing was in the newspaper. So there was like this one theory at one point in the movie. They mentioned that that it was just some random guy was sending out the letters, and he didn't actually do the killing. He was just taking credit for it. So my theory is that they were just a bunch of random killings that weren't related. And So
no, I mean, that's definitely possible, because like the first Zodiac letter that was received, by the San Francisco Chronicle and other newspaper publications, that came 4 weeks after the July 4th murder. So like that's a pretty long period of time. It's a whole month before you decide to be like, oh, that was me. Like if it was, if it was your plan the whole time, I feel like, wouldn't you have been more, I guess, I don't know, proactive about it in a sense, before waiting 4 whole weeks before doing something? And then also, if you keep in mind, I mean, they linked another killing a long time before the July 4th murder to the Zodiac. They connected it to him. So it's interesting to think about, why did this letter and the cipher thing kind of come into play later? So I think that could support your theory in a sense.
Or it could be, I mean, everyone has like so many theories about it. Like, I mean, it could have just been like a bunch of different killings, and this guy kind of just sent out a letter and was like, after the first letter, or maybe the first letter was real, and then after that, because the first letter, he didn't have a name or anything. He didn't call himself the Zodiac. He just kind of put out this cipher and was like, go at it. You know what I mean? And then only after that, he made a name, only after they put him in the news. So it could have just been like a kind of ploy, I guess. Especially considering all the evidence was kind of going in so many different directions.
Yeah. And I mean, this was definitely like a very famous case, especially at the time. I mean, it caused panic pretty much, I guess, maybe even nationally, I would say. It was definitely something very, very scary, and it was very, very popularized, because, I mean, of course, all the newspapers are going to be reporting on it. They were making movies about it while it was still happening. Like, it was just very ingrained into the, I guess, culture at that time. And so then, I mean, of course, crazy people are going to write in being like, oh, I'm the Zodiac. That's me.
Exactly.
I did that. It's to be expected when something is so public like that, that of course people are going to come in and, assert their own opinions and their own kind of, I guess, just assert themselves into it.
Also, at one point in the movie, they mentioned it could be 2 killers. There are 2 Zodiacs. So it's just so many different theories. Like, I mean, the case is, again, technically still not finished. So
yeah, they don't have anyone technically.
Exactly.
I mean, Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, they have, Arthur Lee Allen, who is Robert Graysmith's favorite, but I mean, it's all speculative and it is all circumstantial evidence. So I mean, I think honestly, unless they were able to get him to confess, I don't really think they had enough to convict anyways. Like there was nothing putting him at the scene, nothing tying him to the murders at all, other than just kind of what could be played off as coincidences. Not to say that he didn't do it, but just to kind of think about it from that perspective.
Right, because Toschi himself in the movie at one point says, like, as a cop, like, there is no actual real evidence. Yeah. Timelines kind of match up with Lee, and so a few timelines match up with him, and like a few, I guess, very scary, homicidal sounding personality traits within Lee kind of make him seem like a suspect. But there's no, like, the handwriting was different. The blood and the fingerprints were different. And like also the sketch, you can easily Google it, like the sketch of the Zodiac killer is very different than how Lee actually looks, Arthur Lee Allen actually looks. So very interesting case that just goes every which way.
Yeah, it's really, there's so much, and I mean, I don't think that there will ever be an answer for it, to be honest. I mean, it's been so many years at this point that I think that's kind of it. I mean, of course, there's been like copycat murders since then, people trying to, be the Zodiac, etc. But I mean, other than that original initial case, I don't think that there will ever be an answer to it. So, I mean, it's interesting to think about, interesting to research. Definitely scary at the time, though. And I mean, could still be scary. It's just pretty, I don't know. It was overall an interesting kind of conversation-provoking movie. The actual content of the movie was like fine, but I mean, it just followed the case. So, I mean, it was a good watch. A little too long, in my opinion. It didn't need to be that long, but it was overall fine. I'm happy I watched it because the Zodiac killer in the case in general was just really interesting.
Yeah, the case is what kept me.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess one thing that I will mention, I mean, this movie is kind of widely revered for being so accurate in its depiction of the case and everyone's perspectives. But I mean, they did get a few things wrong. I guess inaccurate, not really wrong. But Graysmith and Avery, apparently, they didn't have a very close collaborative relationship. That was kind of just made up for the movie to have, I guess, those two characters interact. And then I guess Avery, because at one point he kind of dwindles after, I guess he was being called out specifically by the Zodiac because he was one of the main people writing about him at the time. So he's called out by the Zodiac specifically, and then he kind of dwindled to the point after that because he couldn't figure out who it was. And then it showed him in the movie kind of turning to drugs and alcohol, and that was pretty much just the rest of his life was just that. But that's actually not true because he went on to write a whole other book about the abduction of Patty Hearst. So, I mean, he had a full career after the fact. So, I mean, I think his family and friends kind of complained about that. But other than that, I mean, it was all fairly accurate. I mean, the Toschi and the letters, I mean, there's more to be said about that. But they, like you said earlier, they mentioned it a little in the movie.
They did. And also, you also mentioned to me earlier that this one guy who was involved in one of the killings talked about how it was accurate, right? One of the
yes.
Yeah.
So what it was, I forgive me for not remembering their names, but it was the guy and the girl, and they were by the lake, and they were the victims of the stabbing, and only the guy survived. And apparently he said, like,
theme with Zodiac killings, might
yes,
I
it was.
Where the guy would survive and the woman would die immediately.
Yeah. So it was interesting. Because, I mean, even during that scene, I mean, he definitely, stabbed the woman much more than the guy. So that made me think he had some kind of pent-up aggression toward women. But
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, regardless of that, I mean, can you tell that I watch Criminal Minds? Probably. Regardless. So the survivor of this attack by the lake, he actually came out later and said, he watched the movie, and he said that he thought that it was so accurately done, like he could have not written a better script himself for what happened. So that, except, they were just friends. They weren't dating. But other than that, also, he said it was extremely accurate.
They made that guy seem kind of heroic. I think he was a little flattered by that.
Oh, probably. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, he was, it was, sure, you're a hero, That's nice.
Yes.
But so it's interesting. I mean, they really did a nice job. I mean, I read that the directors and everything would go and like read old police files and do a bunch of research before. So it's kind of nice to see care being taken with something, I guess, as widely debated as the Zodiac, and even as something as sensitive as, this is the depiction of actual, murders of people. Like, these are all real characters and real people. So it's nice to see some care being taken with that,
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But other than that, I mean, that's pretty much all that I have. I mean, again, we didn't go through everything nitty gritty in the movie, but just kind of overall discussion about it. Yeah, we just talked about the case the whole time because it's so interesting.
It is, for sure. But yeah, I think that's all. Don't forget to follow us at Boca Tribune on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and also on YouTube if you want to rewatch this later after you watch the Zodiac.
Yes, and after you go on the subreddit for Zodiac, like I will be. But regardless, tune in next week. We're going to be watching The Social Network, so tune in for that. Other than that, thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.